And we're live. With only minor technical difficulties. Hello and welcome to another episode of TKB Live. I believe this is episode 14, possibly 15. Thomas will be with us shortly. He just has one or two things that he needs to attend to. Today we are going to be debating should cards be errata'd, which is quite a popular discussion topic. I will be taking the stance that cards should be errata'd, and Tom will be taking the counterpoint that cards should not be errata'd. So that's what we're going to be discussing in general. Before that, as we are waiting on Tom, we are going to take a look at how the format is developing in the TCG. So we have had a few events this past weekend. There was the Card Market Series in Frankfurt, which was a fantastic event. Unfortunately, none of us were able to make it from the Kuribrohs, but it had an excellent turnout. It was sold out, and it had a very competitive lineup. Ghosties were there, E-Man were there. I don't know if ARG/CCG was there anymore, but regardless, it was high-level competition, and the finals was a striker mirror, so it kind of gives us an indication as to what direction the format will be heading, which is the decks are pretty much as good as they were in the last format. Like, striker is still very playable. Obviously you see combo decks being more playable, or less hit, so that is something that it's worth being cautious of. As it is, the format itself, most people are going to be playing the Worlds format in the coming weeks, so that will be quite different. Obviously, we're going to get to see a lot of that Worlds format in this weekend when people are playing the World Championship itself. So, again, while we wait for Tom, let's take a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope and see how each archetype is faring at the moment. So just give me a second, and I'll bring it up on screen for you guys. Okay, so we should have on screen here for you guys now. So the most played deck in the past week has of course been Salmon Great, and we've seen that float down to the 59% win rate. So that's been pretty consistent. 59 to 60% is where Salmon Great has been sitting throughout this format, and I don't think that's something that we're really going to see changing. Again, it took the hit of losing Gazelles and Circles, but it still has Signet Mining, and it still has the fact that, again, Salmon Great and Sky Striker are very similar in how they're playing in the format, which is they're the control decks, and they're trying to just set up a board and hope that that board is sufficient to stop the opponent. And then they have tools for breaking boards, but obviously they struggle a lot more against things like the Wombo combo decks. But Salmon Great, yeah, it's still consistent. And Striker, again, we see True Draco performing well, and then Thunder Dragon is starting to come more in line with the rest of the format. And so you can just see here, across the top played decks, everything is fluctuating between like 55% and 63%. So it's a very close set. I don't think we're going to see that change much before we get a new set of cards. Altergeist has snuck up to 61%, which is kind of weird. Like, I still don't know how I feel about that deck. It's performing better than I think it should. It's certainly a good deck, but it feels like it should be performing closer to Striker and Salmon Great, especially as it only has the one copy of Multifaker. But we'll have to see whether or not it's able to find better performance. Here we have at the moment, we have the performance of the deck itself, Altergeist, over the past few days. It's been performing very well. Somebody has been doing very well, getting like 60+% win rates a lot of the days. Obviously, dueling book stats aren't the best of all because you have the issue that there's a lot of people playing rogue decks and not real decks in that format. But it's still quite interesting to take a look at where these decks stand at the moment. I'm interested to hear what people think about the current format because I was talking to Tom before we started, and he will be here shortly. But yeah, it's hard for a lot of decks to find a unique space in the format in terms of, like, I think Striker and Salmon Great and Altergeist, again, all pretty similar in terms of how they perform in the format and what they're doing in the format. And then you also see the Pendulum and the Thunder Dragon decks, which do very similar to each other. And so there's not space for the kind of more fun decks like Burning Abyss to really be impactful in the format because it's hard for them to find an identity because what the decks are doing in the format is still very high power, even though they've been hit on consistency. So I think that's something that needs to change soon. We can't have the same decks performing the way they have been going into the next season. With regards to the next season, obviously the first YCSs of the season are going to be, well, the first European YCS of the season will be YCS Ghent. So most of the team will be going to that. I will be traveling to YCS Niagara Falls. So if you are traveling to either of those events, there will be Kuribrohs present. So you can definitely come over and say hi to us and discuss whatever you want to about the format or what you dislike about the show. Despite that, we're going to discuss a little bit about the topic for the debate today, as I think it's an interesting one, and I don't know how familiar everybody is with the topic itself. So, card erratas are something that only happened a few years ago in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and we've not really seen many of them since the first couple of erratas. So, we saw erratas to Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, and then we also saw erratas to cards like Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. And there's important cultural there's an important context which a lot of players might not be familiar with, which is in the TCG we have the advanced constructed format, and then we also have traditional format. And traditional, of course, is the format where there is no forbidden cards. It's only limited and semi-limited. That's not something that the OCG has. And so, for example, I've judged events where we've had traditional format as a competitive format. A big example would be last year I was the head judge for the Giant Pot of Greed tournament at UK Nationals. And when you're head judging events, particularly those larger events, you get a chance to request rulings from Konami on cards that could be contentious. This generally leads to asking questions about cards that have just been released. For example, Lose One Turn was a card that used to get a lot of questions about it. Psyblocker, whenever it's in the meta, is always asked about, and then like interactions between There Can Only Be One and Servant of Endymion and stuff. You know, those weird interactions are things that you get to ask about. But as a head judge for a traditional event, you end up asking questions about cards like Last Will and Final Turn. And the way the process works is that these questions are given to Konami Europe, and then Konami Europe will often pass them on to Japan, who has final say. And you get to a weird situation there because Japan doesn't deal with forbidden cards. Once a card is forbidden, it's dead in the OCG, whereas it's still technically playable in the TCG, even though trad is a format that isn't receiving much support, and it's something that we will have a discussion about later, because Tom and I actually met at a trad event a long time ago, so we have a lot of appreciation for what trad was, but it's definitely a format that needs to be discussed. But yeah, so the erratas make a lot more sense in the OCG context, where if you want a card to be playable again, you have to fix it so that you're happy to bring it off the list, because there is no format where you can play it otherwise. Of course, that presents the other option, which you can just print retrains of cards. So, for example, Trishula had been a very powerful card, and Trishula was banned before the Duelist Alliance format, because I remember Trishula came off the list and everybody was very excited, going to go like Falco plus 2 other monsters into Trishula, or like Norden plus monster plus bulb, boom, powerful. But like we have the new Trishula fusion, and we have the Dragon Mech level 9 synchro, which is like it's not the same, but you can build cards that are similar. So that kind of gives us a baseline for the discussion, so that you guys know. So erratas occurred because the Japanese game wanted to be able to return cards to the game, and a lot of the cards are very nice to have in the game. We see cards like Sangan with the errata seeing play, so obviously it's not a case of cards being completely erased, and Chaos Emperor as well has seen play recently, so that's not a massive problem. An interesting point on when erratas go really weird is if you are familiar with Hearthstone, Hearthstone being the Warcraft TCG that Blizzard publishes. There was a classic deck in that game called Patron Warrior, and basically the way Patron Warrior worked was you had a creature that summoned copies of itself, and there was another creature which said all of your creatures with under a certain strength can attack straight away, and that was called Warsong Commander. And basically they errata'd Warsong Commander, which is a lot easier in a digital card game, because once you errata a card, every single copy is fixed. But they errata'd it so that it has never seen play since, and it's completely unplayable. So that is a negative that you can get from errataing cards, because if you errata them and make them completely unfeasible, then what's the difference between having card banned and having card just that no longer functions the same? I see a few people are discussing it already. It's quite an interesting topic. So AT Spectre says Masterpiece would still be broken with an errata, and possibly, you can errata it in ways that, like, you could make it so that it's only unaffected by your opponent's effects. I think Tom is back, so let's try and get him in here. I'm going to mute myself for a second. We will be right
hello, hello. Dum 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 oh, for the longest thing. Oh, longest ah, ah, ah. Longest time. Ooh, for the longest, if you said good. Oh, we're back. Okay, nice. Okay. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. The backing of the Symphonic Warriors. Okay, what have I missed? I'm sorry that I couldn't be here from the start. Oh no, Daniel, this is not what we wanted at all. So we brought you here to talk about Kuribrohs, the musical. Thank you, Alec. I've heard you the whole time, but yeah. I'll have to relay everything you're saying. Is this going to be fixable, or do we need... Okay. Put trees in the chat if you can hear Dan. Chat says the audio is not fixed. No, there are no trees, only cats. No trees. I can still hear you. The sound quality has changed. I don't know if it's improved or got worse, but I can still hear you. Dan got errata'd. I think so. He might be back, but he's unplayable. What have you done? Attention, chat. Daniel had muted himself.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hello, everybody. We are trained professionals.
We ain't no technologists, though.
Yes. Okay, so...
Fun fact for anyone watching, the casters on the official Yu-Gi-Oh stream don't actually run the software when we're streaming, so we
Yes.
don't have that much experience on this side of things.
Yeah, we have an awesome crew for the YCSs.
Yep.
They are very good, but
Yeah.
we are not them. So, anyway, welcome to the chat. This is TKB Live, and we are going to be debating Yu-Gi-Oh cards being errata'd is good for the game. We are going to be using the same format as last week, which means we're going to be doing 3 minutes of stating our point, and then after we have both made our stance, then we will do a minute of rebuttal each, and then we're going to open the floor to the chat and see what people's general consensus on what is a better argument. So I believe I'm going to be the opening argument, as I am for the proposition that Yu-Gi-Oh cards should be errata'd and that it is beneficial for the game. And then Tom is going to be taking the opposite point that Yu-Gi-Oh cards should not be errata'd. Because...
At some point, we need to stop giving me the easy one.
Oh, I this one's easy peasy. I have given a brief explanation as to why cards are errata'd while we were waiting for you. So everybody has a good idea. And let's just get into it. So Yu-Gi-Oh cards should be errata'd because it allows players to have access to old cards. We've seen cards like Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest, which would be absurdly broken in today's game, but have high nostalgic values, become valuable and considerable in the current format. We see in OCG where Sangan became very popular in Altergeist when Multifaker was at 1, because it allowed you to search the Multifaker, which didn't need to be used on the turn that it was summoned. So this is a clear example of the fact that errata'ing cards can keep them as playable and also allow them to find niche spots in formats. Again, part of the appeal of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the fact that you can play cards from whenever. Errata'ing does cause the issue that cards are changed somewhat, but all of the erratas we have said certainly aim to keep the core identity of the card, while also updating it so that it fits into the scope of the modern game. And that's a really important distinction, is that the erratas make the cards a better design. You can't turn around and tell somebody, hey look, Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End is a fun and well-designed card, because it's not. In the context of the time it was designed, the card was absurdly strong, and in the context of the modern game, it's just even sillier. So it's important that these things are put in check, and I mean, we say it here a lot, that we want to see a day in which the Forbidden Unlimited list is as small as possible, and erratas allow us to do that. The only thing that you could say erratas hurt is the traditional format, but at this point, we're very much in agreement in discussion of the team that traditional isn't a format that needs supporting. OCG doesn't recognize traditional as a format, and even in TCG, it's not a format which is heavily supported, and as such, it's not something that needs to be considered. Like, changing Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End does not impact traditional in a competitive sense, and it has minor impact to people who are playing it casually, because they're often just going to play it the way they want to play it, and then it doesn't affect the collector value, and often making cards playable through erratas means that collector value of old cards can go up. So that is the general point as to why erratas are good for the game. They make cards modernized, allows us to play with classic cards that we remember, and yeah, and so that is my stance as to why cards should be errata'd.
Okay, yeah, there's some interesting points there. Shall I launch straight back in on my thoughts?
Yeah, if you want to go for it.
Okay, so to start, I thought about why a card might be errata'd, and I think I arrived at some pretty similar conclusions to you. You take an old card that has fond memories, or, well, not necessarily fond, but powerful memories associated with it, and it's a card that will be currently forbidden in almost every case, and something about it will be changed many times subtly, sometimes quite drastically, to make it what Konami thinks to be in line with the power level of the format. But when you look at a card like Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, the identity of that card is completely intertwined with its power level. Like the current Chaos Emperor Dragon is just a vanilla. Like, we've seen the card see a little bit of play in some instances, but the people who are playing it aren't using its effect. It feels like an injustice to what that card once was, to see it turned into effectively a textless summon by banishing a light and a dark. And I think that if they wanted to achieve something like that, printing cards like the Chaos Emperor Dragon prize card does the same thing, but in a much better way. I would have quite liked to have seen that card brought in, not in the way that it was, so that if it hadn't been a prize card and it had been much more accessible, it would have renewed the legacy that Chaos Emperor Dragon had, and been able to continue giving players sort of that nostalgic nod, but without destroying the idea that Chaos Emperor Dragon is this all-powerful engine of destruction, and it has to be forbidden because it was one of the most ridiculous cards from the early days of the game. And I really like the idea that some cards were so powerful they had to be sealed away and not played. Which, yeah, I feel like that just gets completely eroded by erratas that work like that. And then there's some cards which just get errata'd, like a Destiny Hero Disc Commander, which was a defining card of a format. And again, hugely nostalgic. It was made a massive impact, and then it just got changed so much that it's completely unplayable, and nobody would even think about putting it in their deck because it's just so awful. And at that point, you've ruined the card for everyone. That's my 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to launch into a quick rebuttal, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you bring up the case of nostalgia and that we can just do retrains that solve the solution and leave these cards on the Forbidden Unlimited list. But that's one of the core points that I raised, is that having a large Forbidden Unlimited list doesn't benefit the game. Little Timmy, who starts playing, who has just watched the new show, doesn't know why cards are on the list. And it makes it more difficult for him to enter competitive events when there are cards that are likely to be forbidden. It is much easier to go over to Little Timmy and say, hey, Monster Reborn only lets you target your own graveyard now, or Chaos Emperor Dragon doesn't let you blow up the field straight away, but you can still play it, than it is to approach somebody and say, hey, look, you just can't play that card anymore. So by offering erratas as an option in this eternal card game, it means that we can minimize the complexity for people who are wanting to enter the game. And I think that's really important and crucial for a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! To last in the long run.
Okay, I'm gonna go straight back in on my side of things, because I have a direct counterpoint to that. And that is that I think that it is both a more enjoyable experience, a more understandable experience, and a more welcoming experience to say, oh, this card was too powerful, so we had to take it out of just this competitive tournament, because the Forbidden Unlimited list is only something that we apply to advanced constructed tournaments. At home, you play what you want. I think it's much more confusing if you have somebody arriving with their cards to play this tournament and you say, yes, you can play that card, but the words that are on that card, that's not what it does. We have a new set of words that obviously you were completely unaware of, that it actually does something kind of a bit like that, but you have to relearn what the card does. And you also need to bring a piece of paper that says what it now does, or you're not allowed to play it. I think that it's just a much cleaner experience to have some cards rotated out by being forbidden and bring in new cards to fill that gap. I don't think that a short forbidden and limited list is a good one. I think that whatever list brings about the best gameplay is the best list.
And I think that is our general debate in whole. I'd love to hear what people think in the chats. Sinister Serpent is being brought up, and the point that erratas are confusing for new players is certainly an interesting one. Let's get a straw poll made so that people can actually vote on where they stand on the issue of erratas. Straw poll. This computer's so slow. How many times in a tournament have you had an issue with errata?
What do you mean by that?
Like have you ever had a case where you've played against somebody who has either not had the errata or not known the errata for a card?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've had people not understand how Imperial Order works. I've had people play Imperial Order against me and think that they only lose life points on their own turn.
Yeah, that's
I think that's one that's come up an awful lot.
Yeah, Imperial Order, particularly as it had a few printings. The straw poll is posted now, so if people want to vote on what they think. The Imperial Order errata definitely is one that has caused issues. I don't think other ones have really seen as much. Like, Order is just such a powerful card, right? And whether it's the errata'd version or the unerrata'd version, it's such a powerful card.
Yeah.
Whereas there's such a big difference between the Necro Valley with multiple erratas is also crazy. That's certainly one of the weirdest ones, right? Necro Valley just kind of changes what it does.
Lil Sheep, Imperial Order has only had a single erratum that actually changed the effect of the card. It's had several printings both before and after it changed to the effect, though.
Yeah, so it has like pre-problem solving card text, and it has a few different versions of that. This is definitely a closer vote than last week, but it definitely seems to be heavily swayed towards erratas aren't good for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I can definitely appreciate the sentiment. It's much more difficult to apply erratas to printed card games. I brought up the Warsong Commander example from Hearthstone, which I'm not
that
sure
was
if
such
you're
a
familiar with.
horrible change.
It was so bad. They deleted the card, but they didn't have the dignity to like delete it. They just like crushed its soul. And
that was an awful update.
You can see that after that, Hearthstone basically introduced a Forbidden Unlimited list where they introduced a Hall of Fame, where they rotated cards that were too powerful instead of just errating them. Even though erratas are really easy in digital card games. Problem-solving card text should definitely be updated on cards. It surprises me that Duel Links doesn't see more cards get non-printed erratas. So, like, we got a few cards which got updated card text on the database before they ever got a printed version. And most of those were to avoid naming, right? I think Muko got updated from Into the Void without getting a reprint, right?
I didn't know that Into the Void had its name changed.
Or not Into the Void, Null and Void.
Okay.
Yeah, Null and Void is now Muko, but I believe it got the name errata around the time of YCS Rimini, maybe?
Mm-hmm. But it hasn't had a print since at all, I don't believe.
Possibly. I thought it had, but yeah, you could be right that they just haven't bothered. It's not a card that anybody's ever going to play, but it's also just not a Void card.
I thought.
Oh.
And it's definitely a card that could see play.
No, Muko can't ever see play. It's really bad.
Why not?
What's the card text on the card?
Reveal discarded.
Okay. You cut out on me there. If you'd like to repeat what you said.
I think it's when your opponent draws cards by a card effect, they reveal the cards and then send them to the grave. Okay. You can activate this card when an effect of drawing card is activated. Both players see the cards drawn by effect and send them all to the graveyard. So it's a very specific card, but it's strong enough that I think it could be playable.
Okay, as far as I know, if the effect does anything else, you can't use Null and Void.
Oh, that's much less exciting.
So, as far as I'm aware, because I discussed it at Rimini with another judge, with Paul, who's like judged forever and ever, so he's more familiar with the ancient dinosaur cards.
Super ancient Dino Beast.
Yeah. And his understanding was like you couldn't Muko Upstart Goblin. You could do it on Pot of Desires, but like I don't think you could do it on Engage or things like that. So I don't know.
Yikes.
It's a weird card and it needs updated text if it hasn't gotten it already. But
okay. Lil Sheep saying that they thought that Imperial Order had a few prints with multiple erratas. I think that would be from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Kia. They have a card errata section that they fill in as text is changed. But in this case, we're only referring to errata being instances where the effect is changed, not just the wording. So I think that Wikia would have every single update for problem-solving text being an errata, where we would just consider that being an update to how the effect is written.
Yeah, so when we're referring to errata, we're very much referring to changes to card text that fundamentally change the identity of the card. So Sangan and Witch both have the fact that you can't activate the card that you add that turn. And I think Sangan and Witch are definitely some of the examples of cases where the errata has been done very well. Like, even when we look to formats like Squirrel format, we've actually discussed this, where it's a case of, like, you could realistically play that format with Sangan as the modern effect, and it wouldn't make any difference. And
well, we do. We play it using the new effects, largely because it makes no difference. But the pace of the game is very different. So I guess in some ways, the post-errata Sangan is the card as it was originally intended. So I don't mind that one so much.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is that, like, a lot of the erratas just bring the cards into line. Like, Ring of Destruction is another one where the errata is pretty reasonable. We've seen Ring of Destruction be played, despite the fact that it's had the errata.
Where did Ring of Destruction see play?
It was being played in the Mind decks at the start of the Nationals format.
Okay.
Yeah, as a 2-of, because you could trap tricks for it. And some decks were playing one of it. But regardless, it's a card that has been considered for play.
I don't think Ring would have been a problem just to bring back as it was.
Yeah, I mean, you can print basically any trap card right now, and it's not a problem. like, and that's something that we're going to have for a discussion, I believe, next week. Or actually, no, next week I am not here, so it will be Tom plus guest, run by Alec. So I'm
Is
not
that
sure.
Tom plus Alec then?
It could be if you want to go over to Alex and record. We'll sort something out. I'm getting ahead of myself. Ring got errata'd with the kind of fundamental change in how damage was dealt. So Alex says Ring only needed the errata to avoid draws, and around the time that Ring got the errata, we also saw Blazing Mirror Force, which uses the same templating of burn yourself, then your opponent. So in the case that old Ring would draw, a new Ring will always lead to you losing. Which,
if that had been the only change to Ring of Destruction, I would have been very happy.
Yeah, so it's a weird one. Royal Oppression post errata just doesn't care. It's still bonkers. And yes, it is a trap card, which is very good. But you can still flip Oppression and not win the game.
Royal Oppression hasn't had an errata, has it?
Our Royal Decree.
Are you thinking of Imperial Order?
Imperial Order. They're all the same cards. They're all... Whoops. Yeah, no, Oppression is bonkers. Oppression is a silly card.
Yeah, Oppression would need quite an errata to be able to come back.
Yeah, I mean, Royal Oppression is better Vanity's Emptiness, and Vanity's Emptiness is already bonkers. I think Vanity's Emptiness is a very interesting card design, and I think it's really close to being allowable in the game.
Yeah, and then it just isn't. But I mean, appreciate that efforts were made to balance it, even if they were nowhere near strong enough.
In the past format, mine would have been in formats where spell and trap removal is inherently in decks. Emptiness is generally a fair card. When people are playing 6 MSTs between triple MST and triple twin twister, then Emptiness isn't as big of a deal.
But traps do nothing, so why would we play MSTs?
Because Mystic Mine. Mystic Mine plus Vanity's Emptiness. But yeah. But basically, what we will be doing as a debate...
Dan, Mystic Mine Vanity's Emptiness is not a combo.
It's
you go to your end phase and they both destroy themselves.
Whee! Whoops. Oops. Yes, we go Temple of the Kings, activate Emptiness, play Mine, go. What was I going to say? A debate that I'm wanting to have, which we will do sometime soon, is whether or not hand traps are good card design, because there's a lot of interesting points as to hand traps kind of take up the space that trap cards possibly should.
Shout out to Alec for coming up with all the good debate topics.
Yeah. He's a clever man. If only he could actually win events, then he's a good kid. He came second at the LLDS.
Stage 2, be clear.
Stage 2, yeah. We've not heard anything about LLDSs this season, so that's kind of spooky.
Konami not announcing events far in advance? Weird.
Interesting. Yeah, so, I mean, we still have a lot of time. I'm thinking if people have questions, we're quite happy to hear from them. Have you been looking at the format at all? Did you follow the events that happened this weekend? There was the Card Market Series in Frankfurt, which sold out and had Sky Striker versus Sky Striker in the finals. Silver Cards had just under 200 players for locals.
Nice. I haven't been following a great deal. I've been enjoying the off season. Took some time to go on holiday with my girlfriend, and I didn't even take any cards with me. That is
What?
it's not often that I get on a flight without a deck
You
box.
were going to Italy and everything.
Yeah, I know. It was lovely. It was very warm. And there was, yeah, lots of sunshine, lots of food. Um, but no, I haven't done a lot of cards. I threw together a Burning Abyss deck, and it was really bad. So I might try again soon. Uh, but yeah, I'm getting the impression that this format just doesn't have a niche for Burning Abyss to fill. I've seen a couple of lists posted online recently, um, but nothing is seeming to do anything that the other decks in the format can't do better. So it might be another time to sleep on it for a little bit. Oh,
Cosmic Durgran is after giving a super chat or whatever they're called. So thank you for that. And asks Psyframe potential. That's an interesting question. I mean, we have Lambda in the format now, right? And that's
Lambda is such a ridiculous card. So I'm just going to pull up the text now so that I get all of the ridiculousness. Yeah, because we discussed this one,
a
myself,
lot.
Alec, and Seb, when we went to locals quite recently. And it's just mad. The fact that it's any two monsters except tokens, obviously they have to include normal monsters because of Cyframe Driver. And yeah, we see obviously Lambda is very popular in Pendulum. It lets you set up on Lambda in your extra monster zone with Psy-Frame Lord Zeta, the level 7 synchro in your main monster zone. And it just gives you new ways into more pieces of interaction, which, I mean, I'm sure anyone that has heard of Triff understands just how many negates Pendulum can put out on turn one. So having even more there. But I guess in this case, we're looking at what Cyframes can do just by themselves or as a majority engine. And I'm not honestly certain that Lambda adds as much value to Cyframe the deck as it does to playing Gamma in other decks for added value.
Yeah, Cyframe are the Link Reigns links kind of suffer from that a lot, where they're kind of cute in the decks they're designed for, but they're fantastic in kind of expanded decks where you just splash a little bit of that archetype. I think if we saw a big slowdown of the format, then Cyframes could certainly become considerable. And yes, Omega to 2 would definitely improve Cyframe's ability to perform in the format. But Lambda is certainly a very exciting card.
The Cyframe continuous trap, as Alec points out, is like a silly good piece of interaction as just like recurring face down banishment. That's bonkers. But like we've already talked earlier in this episode about how you can put whatever text you want on a trap card. It's still a trap card, um, which really limits if your deck's best piece of interaction is a trap, it can really struggle.
Yeah. I mean, Altergeist. Altergeist doing well.
I think yeah, having only one Omega is also a really horrid hit to actual Cyframe decks. Obviously, when it went to one, it absolutely should have gone to one, and it should have gone to one much earlier than it did. But putting it at one has a huge impact on anyone that wants to play Cyframes because they probably would want to include Pot of Extravagance. But if you banish your Omega, you could really be struggling.
Yeah. I feel like Omega is one of those cards where you can like fix it entirely by just errataing it to require a Cyframe. Just anywhere on the card requiring a Psyframe. You can use Psyframe Tutor or Psyframe Monster, or in like brackets, at least one of the materials must be a Psyframe, and then it can just be a tree.
Yeah.
Just like Trishula. It's just like, why doesn't Trishula say... why does Trishula only say Ice Barrier once on the card? It doesn't
Because
make
all
sense.
of the dragons of the Ice Barrier... I mean, I suppose they did do a little bit of balancing on Gungnir, but the idea of the Ice Barrier dragons is that they are like massive extra deck powerhouses. They're iconic cards. And there are plenty of cards that are in complete obscurity because they have complicated summoning requirements, and they don't see play, and we don't even think about them. Like,
but like, why make part of the archetype absurd and the rest of it trash when you can like?
I don't think the rest of it is trash. I think that the Psyframe cards in general are pretty good.
Oh no, Psyframes are good. Ice Barriers are.
Oh sure, yeah, Ice Barriers is trash.
There's some cute Ice Barrier cards, but they all just have like horrendous stats, so that even the ones with interesting effects just like aren't playable in like Cube, and that's very sad.
Wasn't there briefly an Ice Barrier card that was playable because it did something against Shaddoll or something?
The Mirror of the Ice Barrier? Oh,
no. Oh yeah, Mirror of the Ice Barrier is a playable card, and there was one other Ice Barrier.
Mirror of the Ice Barrier is an Ice Barrier counter card. Like, it is an in-archetype card to beat the archetype's own boss monster.
What was Shock Troops of the Ice Barrier? I feel like that's been a card.
Is that not the one that, like, draws or something?
It is a spellcaster. You contribute this card, select one face-up water monster on the field, destroy it. So it's an out to Klausless Djinn, and it...
Oh, I've lost you, Tom. Okay, we have poor connection, so Tom has dropped for a second. We will get the rest of his thoughts on the matter once he is back. So sorry about the delay here, but clearly Shock Troops is indeed playable. Yeah, so it was able to make Annoyatilis in Shaddoll, which Annoyatilis saw very little use in its format. Tom is still disconnected. Stream seems to be outputting though, so you guys can still hear me, but you can't hear Tom. So, okay, here he comes. Yep. Unfortunately, you were very ripperoni. You should be back now.
Am I back on stream too?
I am waiting for the stream to update and tell me, because if I access the software, the stream will die. So,
no.
I will assume that it will correct itself, but we will find out. You cut off in the middle of explaining Shock Troops.
So I don't think that Shock Troops is the one that I was thinking of, because I think the one that I was thinking of adds something to hand. But Shock Troops, is almost a playable card. Tribute.
Alex says it acted Djinn and then searched another copy of itself to fuse into an.
Yeah, that's not this one. This one is just Marauding Captain for Waters. Sorry, it's Destroy and Search one. So yeah, it's Marauding Captain for Waters that, when tributed, also searches for an Ice Barrier.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to shrink you, so you're going to go all jittery on talking, but you will actually appear on the screen. So. Oh, what is this? Okay, there we go. Got you on screen. Okay, we're back. We're back to normal.
Yay, back. But yeah, Shock Troops of the Ice Barrier. Destroys Klausless Djinn, gets around Secret Village of the Spellcasters, and recurs itself. So, it's all right. Yes, I do mean Exiled Force, not Marauding Captain.
So the interesting question was top 5 decks for World Championship events. I am after forgetting the list at this point, but presumably the Wombo combo decks. Striker is playable.
There'll be some kind of deck running all of the Guard Dragon stuff, possibly with Ib Justicar as well. But yeah, there will be a big combo deck featuring Guard Dragons. Striker will definitely also be a real deck. So we get to play before the multi-roll limit, but we are on 2 Engage and 2 Widow Anchor because of the OCG restriction.
But that's fine.
That's fine. Still very much a real deck.
Mm-hmm.
I think Pendulum might be an interesting call. It suffers a lot from quite a lot of cards being limited in OCG. So only 1 Dark Worm. They only have 1 Chronograph Sorcerer. They make up for it in a pure OCG list by having things like 1 copy of Astrograph. And there are a couple of other things that they have and we don't. I think they have 1 Double Iris.
Right.
But even with the harsh hits on both sides of things, I think Pendulum is still a very real contender. Salamangreat is in a reasonable position. It lines up before the TCG hit to circle. So obviously we have to play with just the 1 Gazelle because of OCG, but having 3 circle to search it makes it a lot more viable than post-list TCG. Even though post-list TCG, it's still a real deck. So that would be 4. I'm not sure what I would put as my 5th choice, though.
I think True Draco is potentially a deck, right? Like it's one of those versatile ones, like something like Draco or maybe Subterrors, one of the kind of slightly off meta floodgatey focus decks can be quite good because people aren't as familiar playing against them, and that sort of edge can be quite good. And sometimes it's good to be able to just flip there can be followed by a strike.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a really interesting format this year in that you just play the strongest deck. So last year we saw a lot of people going for a deck like Altergeist because it plays well as an anti-meta choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't look at this format and see an obvious meta deck to play. And without an obvious meta deck to play, looking at anti-meta becomes a lot more realistic. Diagram being banned in OCG definitely puts a big old hit on the True Draco idea.
Yeah, Altergeist could be a good back row deck.
Yep. Or something like Gren Majustan. We saw getting a top 4 finish at the CMS. I'm pretty sure that will be untouched relative to the TCG.
Yeah. For some reason you have shrunk on the screen. So
I think I just sat back a little bit. I can come forward again.
No, it's fine. I fixed it.
Yeah, Altergeist will be pre-multi-faker limit.
Mm-hmm.
So that we could see Altergeist being again the anti-meta deck that a load of people go to.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of weird because we're going to have a Worlds format that actually has format progression because we're going to see Worlds this weekend. And then that's going to inform the first weekend of World Celebration events. And then we'll have the second weekend of World Celebration events, which will be somewhat affected by our by the first week of celebration events.
Oh, I'm just being told by chat that I'm still misinformed on OCG lists and that Faker is already at 1 over there.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
Yep.
He's been at 1 forever.
It'll still be a real deck with only 1 Faker, but less strong. I still wouldn't be surprised if we do see it kicking about, though.
I feel like OCG actually hit a lot of decks because I don't know why their format was different. I think there's a level of kind of they approached the Forbidden and Unlimited list in a very different manner.
They approach the Forbidden Unlimited list by having 2 copies of That Grass Looks Greener, 3 Left Arm Offering, 3 Fairy Tale Snow, and nobody playing 60 card decks.
So we're going to Japanese YCS to play VA, right?
I mean, there are so many options that you could play with that kind of a setup, but I don't see anyone going for it. I don't understand why.
Mm-hmm. If flights were cheap, would you fly to a Japanese YCS?
That would entirely depend on whether my girlfriend wanted to go to Japan.
Reasonable.
Because there's no way that I would be flying out to an event so far away if it wasn't something that we were going to be able to do together. But yeah, I mean, if it were really cheap and she was able to come along, then yeah, I'd love to go and play an event in Japan. But unless it would be something that we could go and do together and make a holiday of it, then it would be way too much like investment and time off work.
That's fair. Some interesting questions have been brought up. First off, Bardiche isn't banned for Worlds.
Okay.
That makes sense interesting. I've just not studied Worlds format enough yet.
I think that makes Orcust really interesting to play because you have to play without Mermaid, but you can just play a deck that's a bit heavier on Orcust and rely on things like Mathematician or Scrap Recycler to find your way into the Orcust engine, but you still have the payoff at the end. And I think that would be a very interesting deck to play. I don't know off the top of my head how good it would be. I don't know how much the power of the Orcust deck is just on being able to start on any 2 monsters, but I reckon that has some legs to it. I think that would be definitely fun to play and probably still very good.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, the case. This format, earlier on in the show, I brought up Yu-Gi-Oh! Scope to look at what win rates were like in the current TCG format.
Let me guess, everything's at 60%.
No, most things fell to 59%. Oh.
Stop the press!
But yeah, it's like, even Thunder Dragon, again, it's like at 63%, so like everything is just like hovering around the same level for the top decks. So either A, the data there is not usable data, or like it's not fully accurate, or B, we have a format where there's a lot of decks which are all very close to each other in power level. And I believe it to be B. Like,
it's almost as if they put together a successful Forbidden Unlimited list.
But like
what?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like, I don't think it's a bad list. I think there is an argument that we still just have like absurdly powerful decks in the format, and that's kind of the problem. But we have so many different ones that you could like literally play a different.
You can pick your poison.
You could play a different deck every week of a month and win locals every single one of those weeks.
You could do it for 3 months in a row if the format actually stood still for 3 months.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Like, I like that. I think that we're pretty much aware that the power level isn't going to be going into retrograde anytime soon. And if you're prepared to embrace that and you enjoy the gameplay, then having a format where there are loads of decks that you can play, at least some of the time, is really nice.
People are discussing Bardiche in the chat. As far as I know, Bardiche was released in our legendary hero decks, but it was then released in Link Vrains 2, like a couple of weeks after that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that OCG has Bardiche.
Yeah, so like it was like a super quick import because I'm pretty sure it was a case that we would assume that it's a case that Japan designed Link Frames 2, and then America and Europe were designing their Christmas product, which is the legendary Hero Dex, and they were like, we need something to sell this. And Ascension Sky Dragon probably isn't that card. So they took 3 cards from the Link Frames pack. That's my hypothesis.
Bardish is such a silly card.
Yeah, but I don't think it was designed as a world premiere for Europe. I think it was, or for like TCG. I think it was a case that it was designed for Japan, and then TCG was like, we need some good cards, please.
But yeah, the fact that they clearly tried to balance it, and obviously the clause on there that says it can't be used as link material is absolutely 100% necessary.
It's so pointless. It doesn't matter.
Daniel, it matters so much.
Oh no, he's gonna summon 2 topologic bomber dragons. Oh.
You would not want to be around in a format where you could use Bardish as a link material.
I mean, just errata all of the Phantom Knight traps so that they have to summon in defense. Fixed it. Fixed your format.
But we don't like erratas. We've discussed this.
I love erratas. They're great. Imagine Wagons asks, what's been going on? Welcome to the show. We had lots of technical difficulties today, but
weird. That's never happened before.
We discussed erratas, and actually erratas came out with one of the closest polls that I've seen. I mean, we've only done 2 polls, but it's like it was reasonably.
I think
close.
We need to switch up the format a little bit so that we drop a straw poll before as well.
Yes.
And so if we're doing it as a debate, the winner of the debate is the one who changes the group opinion rather than just the person who happens to be playing for the side that's more popular.
That would make a lot more sense, actually. Yeah, I mean, the errata'd argument, I think there is legitimate reason to errata cards, and the context that I gave before, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but traditional just isn't a format in OCG.
Yeah.
So, for them, the only way to make cards playable again, to make classic cards playable again, is
the only way to make classic cards tournament playable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they want to reprint a card, they want it to be playable. Like, they don't want to reprint cards that are banned, because that doesn't make sense. We've seen it a bit in TCG, but again, you have the traditional excuse here where you can just be like, oh, well, you can just play Trad. Right? Reprint Pot of Greed, you could just play Trad. It's cool.
Reprint Exit on Night, and then maybe like a year later it won't be banned anymore.
What? I mean,
that happened.
That was a weird one. That was Battles of Legend 1, right?
I think so, yeah. And we waited more than a year for it to get unbanned.
Yes, something like that. Yeah, no, it was ages and ages between getting that reprint, which is a very odd one. But again, that is a TCG and not an OCG.
There was also a structure deck that had a Monster Reborn like a week or 2 before Monster Reborn got banned previously.
I mean, that's not surprising. Monster Reborn bounces back and forth. Like, I swear Monster Reborn has been on and off the list 50 times at this point.
No, Dan, we've had a big long discussion about this in the Kuribrohs chat, and I think Chaos Sorcerer was the most active bouncer on the Vanilla Limited list. It had something like 11 changes.
That's crazy. That card's like a really cool card. I remember getting that as common in a pack of Invasion of Chaos
Yeah,
on the
it was
ferry.
such an obscene comment.
Like, and it was just like so bonkers. Even as like a kid who had like no context for what the competitive game was, just seeing this like 2,300 like a summon skull that I don't have to tribute for, basically, that also just kills their summon skull and they can't reborn it.
Yep. Imagine Wagons. Would you say it would be worth it to do a 14-hour round trip for the Brotherhood 1K event to get some practice for Ghent? By the way, it will be within a 32-hour window. For one, that sounds pretty mad. For two, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, obviously you're going to do it. For three, on a more serious note, the Brotherhood events are so good. Um, Michael Luiso, who runs all the stuff there, is one of the best, if not the best, tournament organizer that I know. Like, his events are reliably fantastic. Like, they are so much better than the average tournament that you'll go to. So if you're on the fence, sort of like, do I, don't I? I'd say definitely go for it because his events are just so good. And yeah, for anyone that has the opportunity to travel, particularly for the Brotherhood Open, which tends to be a really big regional, I think last year they had the largest UK regional other than the UK Open.
Mm-hmm.
So they got just under 250 players for their regional, and it was a really great event. It's
I
always
mean,
really
that's
fun.
larger than the Open in York was, right?
Yeah, I think it.
UK
Yeah,
Open
it would
3
have been.
was like 170, 180-ish, I think.
So yeah, for the 2018-2019 season, I think it probably would have been the largest UK event.
Yeah. I think, like, if you're looking for a competitive event to go to this season, like, the Brotherhood seems like a really good one. Make sure that you pre-book online because they do
Yeah.
have very limited spaces. But if practical, and if you'd enjoy going to it, it seems like a very, very good event.
And if anyone is listening to this now and shows up, just make sure that you go and say hi to Michael. Tell him that Tom sent you along to go and see his event because he says they're the best events because they are.
You heard it here first, folks. Yeah, Brotherhood events are very legendary on these Fair Isles. As it is, I think we can take one last question and then we're gonna have to finish up. So if anybody has any exciting questions that they want to throw at us to, like, really challenge us in some way, you're welcome to. In other news, you might be able to see that we have new graphics that I've been working on in the background of the stream here. So we will be having some visual updates to the stream over the next few weeks as I kind of like tweak and mess around with those. Patrons have access, the 5 and €10 patrons have access to the original version of this, and I'll be putting up more of those, so there are screensavers and stuff available. But yeah, I think we will be back next week looking at what happened at Worlds and definitely have more of a focus on what's going to be good for the World Celebration events because, again, the prizes for those are going to be pretty good. Best rogue deck, which can take a shock regional win, YCS top. I mean, it's always BA, right?
I don't think you can count BA as rogue just because it's existed forever. It's kind of it's not even rogue, it's just BA. Like in every other sense of the word, it absolutely is rogue because it's definitely not a tier deck right now, but you kind of it's got to a point where you can't be shocked if it does well just because you're like, well, it was going to eventually.
Yeah.
Um
I think I think it's Tom in the chat asked about this. This is not a print from the New York show. It is my prize from the Community Day back in December, and it is a Dark Side of Dimensions print. I assume you can get them online somewhere. I don't know where they got it from, but it is really nice, and I like it a lot. Actually, that's a quick question that I wanted to ask. You get to play OCG cards for this, for the Worlds events. Do you have any shiny OCG cards that you're gonna play?
I think the only shiny OCG card that I own is a Fairy Tale Snow, and I don't think I'm gonna get to play it.
No.
So Fire Fist gets support. What do they need to be relevant again? I have no idea. They need some way of not being so reliant on the normal summon.
I will be recording content about Fire Fist with James once they get revealed, because James has spent countless days of his life playing Fire Fist. He is.
So instead, shall we come back to Fairy Tale Snow and say what do we think about Snow's burn in the current format? I'm going to open with it's completely necessary. I miss playing it because it's really nice as having a piece of interaction in BA. It would be really cool to be able to play Shooting Riser Dragon, send Fairy Tale Snow, and then overlay for Dante. But we can't, and it's probably good that it's banned because it would be more broken in other decks.
Yeah. Snow is bonkers. Like, I love the Fairy Tale cards in terms of like their design. They have like really, they just ooze flavor in their effects. But Snow is bonkers.
Yeah.
Do you know the flavor relevance of each of Snow's effects?
No.
So, Fairy Tale Snow, based on the story of Snow White, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
7 dwarves.
7 dwarves. Cards. Banish 7 cards. And then, why does she flip a monster into face down defense? Because it's the poison apple.
I mean, sure, but that could have been...
Yeah, that's like, because it represents kind of like a paralysis almost.
Okay.
I think that's pretty good. I think it's
I can get behind that.
Because like Cinderella searches like equip spells because slippers are apparently equipment. But yeah, it's cool. I don't know if I know what Luna's relevance is because I'm not familiar with it, but Luna is bonkers as well. I think on that excellent lore discussion, we are going to call it a night. Thank you all very much for joining us. Sorry again about the technical issues. If you have any thoughts on the format or things that you would like to see us debate, please do let us know down below. If you're at the World Championships and you see myself or Ping there, please do come over and say hi to us. I will be leaving relatively early because I do need to then catch a flight elsewhere in the world. But I'm very excited for it. Other than that, we will be back next week with Tom and not myself, and potentially some other guests to discuss more Yu-Gi-Oh! And discuss what the World Championships means for playing World Championship celebration events. So thank you all very much for joining us. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, or morning wherever you are in the world, and we will be back soon with more Yu-Gi-Oh! Content.